Cue intro music. Welcome to the Underground QA podcast, everyone, a podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. My name is Ariel Smith. I'm a test discipline manager with Bungie, and my pronouns are she, her. We have three fellow QA professionals joining us today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is David Benefield. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a QA lead at Obsidian Entertainment.
Hello. My name is Dani. I am my pronouns are she, they, and I am a quality engineer at a company called Mabl.
Hey, I'm Marcin, and my pronouns are he, him.
Just a quick disclaimer, all individuals appearing on the podcast are not doing so as official representatives of their respective community or companies, and their opinions expressed here are their own. All right, great. So today we are jumping into test automation. We're going to talk about the essentials of what automation is and how you can get started. And we will also be discussing why you should invest in automation and what the pitfalls are of using test automation. And to start us off, we're going to do a lightning round, which is, what is a really tedious thing about your current or previous job that you wish you had automated? Who wants to go first?
I can kick that off. So we had probably like 600 regression tests that took a team of 4 people about a week to actually complete. And a bunch of them were just like, hit save on an empty form and then fill in one thing and make sure that error goes away. And just those like error validation alone took probably at least half a day. And that feels like something that very easily could have been iterated through and automated very simply. And it was tedious to do that every release. So yeah, that.
Great example.
I've got a recent one that I just learned about this week that I need to go deal with next week. Build delivery. Although I have build delivery working really well for internal, I found that my external QA team is actually sitting there waiting 30 minutes every day for their build to download. I'm like, that is a solvable problem. Let's go fix that. So yeah, automating build delivery so you can just start your day when you get in the office.
I feel because my dream is working for Ubisoft Connect. Sometimes we always try to validate all games that are released in Ubisoft. But getting all the builds on all platforms, and now currently it's around 11 platforms from all different game projects that are in Ubisoft is a pain. Like PC, it's easy. Like I can grab it from being Ubisoft Connect, I can just grab it. But getting console builds and, you have to get it from Assassin's Creed, from Far Cry, from this, from that, from all the games. It's like, I wish sometimes my company wasn't so big and I just could, go to my friend near the desk and give me a build instead of being like, now you have to sign up 20 wafers to get a build.
My worst example was when I was working at a company previously, and we were testing on a console. We needed a bunch of console accounts, and so they just had us manually create accounts by going through the sign-up process. The problem was we needed like 1,000 of them, so they assigned 4 of us to just spend a day creating console accounts over and over and over again. And I know for a fact this is automated now, and you can just ask a lot of these console companies, please give us 1,000 accounts, and they'll just do it, generate them, and send it to you. But that was not the case at the time, and so we had to just manually create accounts. And so me and my coworkers just kind of got into a race to see who could create the most faster, which made the time go a little bit faster, but still, it was pretty darn tedious, and I'm glad that, or at least I hope that no one has to do that ever again. So yeah, anyway, the reason why we are talking about very tedious things about your current or previous job that you wish you could automate is because that's a lot of what the potential of test automation is finding those kinds of tedious things that testers do or testers need assistance with, and trying to automate them so we don't have to spend a bunch of human time on that task. And so test automation can take all kinds of forms. So why don't we dig into what automation is a little bit more? Does anyone want to talk about like what their perspective on, just broadly speaking, what is test automation? What can it be used for? And what are the benefits of using things like that? Super broad, I know, but we're starting at the most intro level possible and then going deeper.
I think when you look up automation, usually you'll see automation frameworks, which is basically a set of tools and guidelines for things to automate for people. So usually when you get RunRX or that Unity test framework or Epic automation tool, but there's also automation tooling in itself. So aside from just focusing on, because that's usually people focus on, right? It's a bot playing like a human, right? Like that's the most advanced and most complicated thing you can do. But on the simplest form is just having any tool, like your example, Ariel, with creating accounts is the simplest one. Like, why sit there for 8 hours and create thousands of accounts? You can just click a button and it just creates a series of accounts for you, right? So in simplest form, I think is any simple tool that automates any task for you.
I think
like in an atomic level.
One of the very first things that I automated ever was I used this thing called Auto Clicker, and the only thing I needed to do was I needed to open up boxes and then count what came out of those boxes. And so I just used Auto Clicker to just rapidly click to open up a bunch of boxes until I had 1,000 of them, and then I could calculate the odds of like what was coming out of those boxes. But prior to that, someone had to manually click those 1,000 boxes. And so even something as simple as that can be, automation.
That actually just brought me back. Like I had my very first QA job. I had to like go through a whole bunch of links in like 4 different browsers and 4 different VMs, and that was like a macro tool that was similar to an auto clicker. That was amazing. To add on to what Marcin said, I also think that an automation framework does include the processes that are involved, like that involve the people that happen around that. So like you can have a good set of tooling, but what are your best practices? What is that review process? Like automation is not just, all right, it's automated now, but it's also if a test fails in the forest and no one's there to read the results, like, does it provide any value? You need to have that process built around it, those best practices, a review process. You need to have all of that around whatever tooling it is to actually get the most out of that framework. So I think it is tooling, and there's so many different formats in which that tooling can come in, but how you build the people and the process around it is also, I think, a key part of the actual framework itself.
Yeah, I think we've chatted about this already, but I want to make sure it's really clear is that you don't have to automate everything either. And in this context, I mean, even just automating one piece, if you can take something that took 5 clicks, you have to do 5,000 times, you get it down to 1 click, you have to do 5,000 times. That's still automation. So I'm going to probably echo this a lot. It's like you don't need to do the full thing. If you can just do the first step and make something simpler, that counts. So automating even in between steps is another form of automation.
Yeah,
I think I have an example for the process one, like Dani that you mentioned. Like, well, I don't have integration between Teams and my Todoist, my personal Todoist, because of company policy and privacy. So I use if this then that, which is a nice software for mobiles. And I basically, whenever I see something I want to put into Todoist, I tell that, take that from chat from Teams and put it into Todoist in the form I want. It's basically a nice process that I just click one button and it creates a whole cascade of different actions. So then, I have a nice process of making an action list from items from Teams.
Heck yeah.
And a framework, I think that's a great point, because like a framework can consist of so many different sets of tools. It's like all the building blocks and the pieces that you put together to actually make all the things happen. That like, I love if this and that. I've used it so many times for personal things, and every once in a while it's got that work use too. So that's a great example.
Well, we're already.
And that's a mobile app. You can use it. You can use it for anything. So you can any mobile app that you're using probably has an API. So if you have any task on mobile on your private life that you're like, I wish I could automate that, probably you can. You just don't know it. Just research if this then that, and you'll be surprised how many stuff you can automate. And it basically has integration with Gmail, I don't know, Twitch, whatever it is. You can just use it, and it's very intuitive. So you can easily automate anything you want.
Zapier too.
Yeah.
The shortcuts app, if you use a Mac, though, I feel like a lot is Windows because gaming, but like there are different really powerful resources that can be utilized. Auto hotkey, if your company allows that,
Yep.
very powerful, very powerful. And just the things that are repetitive, if you can save those clicks, it's amazing. I personally have used I've done automation frameworks for work. Like I've written Selenium tests for web. I've used the tool my company makes. Like there's a lot of different. I've done currently writing some like playwright functionality for some browser based stuff. And I like there's all these different methods to help for work. I also use some of those for my own personal uses. Like in the similar vein of like at work, if I've got something that I've got to do manually and over again, there's times where I'm just like, that looks more interesting. Let's go do that. And like, it's still something beneficial, but because there's such like, because it is that tedious and it is not something that really gets that like human value out of the time, like it's sometimes harder to even go and approach some of those. So I think a framework is something that makes the testing also potentially more approachable and easier to like go and action on and provide value. David will probably mention more of this later, but he gave a bunch of really good examples of like just some Jira stuff that like I was like, I want all of those things because I don't know about anybody else, but actually writing up a bug sometimes like can feel great when you do it well, or it's like a really good bug and you isolate it and took a lot of effort, but like sometimes there's just so many steps that just I don't want to actually have to write this up. So taking not even necessarily like automating the thing itself that you are creating, but automating the parts that aren't fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think is a great way to consider like where does this framework that you are creating and this processes that you are implementing, how wide does that go, and where are you actually looking to benefit from the value of automation?
Yeah, I think as a person who is not very technical and doesn't know how to build an automation framework, I find that teams that have frameworks that I can like interact with and kind of helps give me guidelines on where to ask for automation or what kind of automation is possible. Whereas if I'm working with a team that doesn't have any kind of framework at all, it can be really hard to figure out like what's even within the realm of possibility, like what's within scope that I can ask for. Because like there's I think two different roles in testing as it relates to automation. One is being the person who is making the automation, and the other is being the person who is asking for the automation. And sometimes those are the same person, right? And you're just making things for yourself or for your team. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a manual tester who's like, I need help. Gosh, it would be nice if someone automated this. If only I knew someone like that. Not realizing there's maybe a whole team of esthets somewhere else in the building who can help them with exactly that problem. But having a clear framework around this is how we do automation here. This is how you can ask for automation. This is how you can get help. This is what's within the realm of possibility. That can then help steer a person like me to say, okay, well, now I know what's possible. And maybe even help me learn to do it myself, because a robust enough automation framework can give a non-technical person some tools to start building automation that they wouldn't be able to build otherwise. Like Ranorex was an example of something I once looked into as because for exactly that reason. But I didn't have someone to help me like set it up as the framework that we were using, so it never really went anywhere. But if I had that person, then I think that a tool like that could have been really useful for me specifically.
And just to even open your mind to even more possibilities, that aside from having like software automation, you can also have hardware automation. So there are lots of boxes that allow you to automate a lot of stuff. One of the things that I used in my previous jobs was eTrinegy Neo 1. It was basically a box to simulate network stuff. So you input any devices you want, and it would basically, via API, you could make different types of tests. So you could, for example, simulate going inside an elevator and going outside to simulate a realistic when you have somebody's playing your mobile game and you need to simulate what happens if he goes to an elevator. But even the simplest, whenever if you had a lab when you had to test multiple setups, a KVM switch when you just hit a button and it switches between monitors and keyboards and PCs. So you basically can assign into KVM switch with keyboard, video, mouse switch. You can assign numbers to different PCs and monitors, and basically, okay, I want to test this machine with Windows 7. Click a button now. Everything, your mouse and keyboard is hooked up to that machine, and then you flip a switch, and now it's Windows 8. You flip a switch, it's Windows 10, even those things. So everything only in terms of software, but also hardware. There was even a joke, an urban legend about a very savvy hackerman guy in the office that apparently had a script because he hacked into his coffee machine that he would run with a delay of 17 seconds because that was exactly when it take him to go to the coffee to get that to the kitchen to get that coffee, to just go and enter and just have a cup of coffee.
What does he do if there's someone already there? Like he has to wait.
I don't know. That's why probably it's an urban legend, but apparently he just automated everything at his job and played games all day.
Oh, there you go. I mean that I think dives very nicely into the next part of this I want to talk about, which is why should you automate aside from making it so that you can just have automation do your job for you and then you can play games all day. But we've talked a little bit about like the idea of it helps you save time on by automating repetitive tasks, right? So you don't have to spend as much time doing those kinds of things that you don't really want to be spending your time on, and then you can spend them on more complicated human-oriented tasks. But are there other reasons that we like want to do automated testing and want to automate testing wherever possible?
I will jump on this one, and I will say one of the I've got two that kind of stand out immediately. One is kind of like the different OSs concept. If you have a script, or if you have a piece of automation, then like you can sometimes paralyze the ability to actually test that in multiple different configurations. So like if you have a test for web, maybe you've got like a user sign-up flow or something similar, you can have one test that goes through and tests on multiple browsers all at the exact same time. And instead of having to like launch a browser, try it, and then do the same thing again and the same thing again and the same thing again, like we've already alluded a bunch to how like part of the best reason to automate is to kind of like enable humans to do other things and not these repetitive tasks. I know personally that the more I do something, the more that like blurs into the background sometimes, where like something that I wouldn't that unless it like is jarring, sometimes you might miss something because you've done that path so many times. Like when I think about it, there's also that consistency piece. It will do it the same way every time. And if it stops working, it stops working. If it keeps working, it keeps working. But the way that it's written, it will execute that without missing a beat every time. Now it's only as good as you write it. So like it's not a human looking at it that I remember at one point there was at said last job I mentioned before, there were these HTML comments that would appear sometimes in our web pages. And it was typically by someone forgetting to like close a comment the right way. And suddenly there was just like these extra weird lines in the top left corner of a screen. Didn't break any of the functionality, but like you wouldn't necessarily think to choose to find that. That's it. The more that you can free up humans to do that kind of work and that exploratory testing, and less of the repetitive thing that they will get bored of and potentially miss things, the more value you can get out of the human and the less they have to do the tedious automation.
Yeah,
and on that note of consistency, it's a nice snapshot of time as well. Like there were multiple instances where the smallest things changed, like when I was using image recognition as a guide to know the state where the automation is, and I was using an icon for gold, and it was changed, but the change was so small. I didn't notice because it's like, yeah, it's just sack of gold. But because automation was like, no, it has to be this exact same sack of gold, I was like, there was an update to all icons in the game. I was like, oh, let's discover and let's go and test the icons and go to the art team and discuss what was changed so we can. But it wasn't communicated at all, and because automation was the snapshot of time using that asset in that particular time. Now, if it fails, now you're like, aside from it being now, okay, now I have to spend time fixing my automation test so it works again. But now you got a very valuable information, as you said, Dani, like sometimes going through the motions, and even the changes may be so small you don't even notice them, but automation will notice, and it's important to have that, and even the smallest of things to be notified to you.
I think there's
also go for it.
I was gonna say there's a good psychological benefit too. So like one of the simplest things I want to point out later in the episode is in Unreal you can use the command Ghost, which lets you fly around and fly through walls. And so I found myself always typing the console command, like open console, type the word Ghost, press enter, so I can enter this mode, and then open the console, type the word walk, so that I can go back. And it's not a lot. It's pretty simple. I don't have to spend a lot of time. But when my team finally figured out, oh, we can go change INI files in stock Unreal and replace Control 7, Control 8 to Ghost and Walk. And by putting it on a hotkey, because we made it so much simpler, not only did my life get better that I'm not typing that console command all the time, but I found instances where I wouldn't have used Ghost and Fly. Now that it's automated and it's easier, I'm more open to using those more. I found myself using it more and more and more in cases that I hadn't thought of using it before because I've lowered that barrier to entry because it's automated.
I really like that idea.
They're in the keyboard shortcuts for everything.
I really like that idea of just lowering the barrier to entry to make it so it's actually a thing you want to do now.
Jumping off of something that was said earlier around like the information that you get back to and it kind of being a known state, I think a really powerful thing about automated tests is you can actually kind of think of them as documentation to some degree of exactly how something currently works. And I think there's a lot of power. The more like human readable you can actually create your tests, the more value they can provide to not just even like the teams that are managing the automated tests, but even teams outside of that. Like if someone can go and look at a test that's for a specific path or a specific quest or a specific whatever you're trying to do and see exactly what the steps are and be able to read that as a human being, like that is there's a lot of power there. And you know that documentation is up to date because if it's not, you have failing tests and nothing is getting updated until those tests are passing. So like thinking of it from that state of being that this is how this is right now is a really powerful concept for the value that can come out of test automation and the value of how you actually how you actually create your automated tests and the format in which they exist.
Yeah.
Any piggybacks? Because I've got another one.
I have one. Usually when you depending on the different tests, you can have not only screenshots because usually people think of screenshots, but you can have it make a whole video. And there are some instances when it's valuable. I think one of the tests that we have is ping asset test, where we basically teleport the player character into a scene, have it recorded. The algorithm goes and checks what is ping, what is not a ping asset. A ping asset is when there is either a texture or any effects missing. But then you have a whole video, which obviously the automation marks you, which are the points where he noticed it. But as you said, now you have documentation, how the area looked in different points, and it's always available. So whenever you want to see how the different location changed over time, imagine having humans doing that and documenting that. And then usually with automation, you have tied the build number, the date, everything. So you can basically do like those sped up videos when you can see you can collage everything
time-lapse?
and time-lapse, and see how it's changed. And you as we said, like something that the human brain won't perceive because it's like, it's not jarring, right? Like I've seen this location so many times, but when you have it as a comparison side by side, you're like, oh shit, so many things have changed. And that might be either algebraic information you don't care for, or might be super vital when you're deciding what to test next.
Metrics that you can get out of test automation, even if it's like not necessarily something that is the test itself, but like I'm the test right now. Oh, I'm in this area. Let me just grab a bunch of logs and grab a bunch of information, and that way you have that historic reference. I think there's a lot of power in that, because there's a lot of times also that like I swear this changed, and maybe an engineer like doesn't actually think it did. If you have something that has that historic record, you have the ability to be like, I know this changed. I've done this path a bunch of times, and this did not used to be this way. And you can see in this build, and this build, and this build, these screenshots, and this video, and this log output, like this has changed. And it like being able to speak to that and know that and have that articulated. I think even potentially like if you've got enough data in the right format, being able to have automation that goes through those logs and identifies changes, that's really powerful when you can get something like that.
And going further, just not only can you retroactively find out when it started, but you might find it faster. Because like if there's a bug in some distant level partway through the game, like I'm not guaranteed that my testers are actually going to get to that specific spot within the next time frame of the next build. But if there's an auto player that just automatically went there and did some other job, if the level crashes, the auto player crashes, and I know immediately that I need to go spend some time investigating that thing. So not only can you go retroactive, but that it'll just tell you quicker that, hey, this is important, go find it before somebody builds on top of this bad thing that then makes it harder to debug and takes more time. You save a bunch of time by finding it quicker.
But sometimes, like aside from focusing on the thing that everybody wish they automated, sometimes you can automate things you haven't even dreamt of. Like everybody did soak tests when you just leave the thing on and for 8 hours, right? What if it's like a legit soak test when it's basically an automation that plays that for 8 hours like a human being, right? What if you're a small company and you have a multiplayer game and you don't have 32 people? Like whenever you were in a big company, everybody at least once had to suffer through a wide studio test when everybody tries to play the game and it crashes and all stuff. Like now you can have automation that basically runs 32, 64, 108, how many players you want, and can be during the night, during the day, however you want, right? And not only that, you don't need 128 PCs for that. Like you can have virtual machines. You can basically go and ask IT for powerful machines, and instead of having 128 PCs running that, you can just have, I don't know, 8 PCs and run those 128 instances of your game. So having this automation allows you to think outside of the box, not only automating what you're actually doing, but then you always wanted to test your game in a setting where it's 64 players playing with each other. Now you don't have to dream. Like you can just have 64 players, which are bots. Of course, it won't be as human as you would want it to be, but still having that stability and performance where you can check your servers and make sure that they don't crash at 64 people. It's even better if they can do random shit, right? Play and have it even if you don't have a team of 64 people. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and I think for that it also depends. Like you just talked about how it's like not necessarily like you can have 64 people up and maybe they're not doing everything. It depends on also what you're trying to learn from that. Like testing and test automation is all about information gathering about like, hey, there's this new build. What do we need to know about it? Does it meet our expectations? Is it working out as we expect? And like, if you're trying to make sure that it doesn't break with 64 players logged in, then yeah, that's perfect. You don't necessarily like, there can be someone that goes through to validate a certain other part of functionality, making sure like new updates and changes didn't break, that they work how you would expect, that they feel how you would expect. Like you can have a human do that part and save that, like use that human resource in the most valuable way that they can, being a human and feeling it and connecting with it. And let the 64 robots do that. Let that automated system, the scaling system, however you've got it set up, let that handle the load soak test, whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
The other thing about your hardware is your hardware can work at night while your humans are, rightfully getting their sleep and not crunching. But the other colors like dev kits, especially in games like I'd always want to get more dev kits. No matter how many dev kits people give me, I always want another one. So the fact that I can use those at night for automation stuff and use them during the day for my manual testing is just a huge boon. And that came up a bunch at our GDC roundtables. That how do you use your dev kits at night so that you're using that resource. It's not just sitting around.
Yeah.
This reminds me of there was a recent Rick and Morty episode where they would like program their night versions of themselves while they were sleeping to do things like dishes for them and stuff like that. This feels like you're programming your night dev kit basically to do stuff for you while you're sleeping. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Rinse the dishes.
All right, so we spent a lot of time talking about the great things about automation. We're definitely going to get into the pitfalls of automation later. But first, I want to spend some time talking about how do you get a team started with automation. So let's say you're a tester on a team. Your team is currently doing, as far as you know, 0 test automation. How do you actually introduce test automation as a strategy to your team? Like, what's the first step?
Figure out what and why.
Yeah.
And document it. Like anything that you are implementing, even if it is a tool that is super easy, takes time, energy, and effort, and also process change, none of which come for free. But I think the most important thing is if you recognize opportunities for automation, then document it, show it, and speak the language of the people that make the decisions. Like if it's a time thing, if it's a money thing, whatever it is, document why and be as specific as you can, so that then you can either yourself be given the time to figure out what the right next steps are, or as a team figure out how to actually move forward and what tools to choose and how to actually accomplish the things that you recognize as an opportunity for automation.
I think there's
the why is very important because it's something that you don't. For you, it's obvious why it should be automated because you're near it and it pains you, but it doesn't mean it pays anyone else, right? And if you cannot sell the idea that elevating your pain will allow you to support the team better, then you'll have a hard time and you'll be just grinding your gears and being angry why they don't see that automating that stuff. It's so obvious. It's obvious to you, but you have to make those, answer those questions. Why? What's the value? How much money it saves or time, or what frees you up, or whatever the benefits are. So try to figure out the perspective of others, how they will see that automation and how it can benefit them as well.
I've spent so much time in that, you just don't understand. You don't understand why this needs to be, and not spending the time to help them understand why this should be automated and why we need to approach this with that mindset. And yes, there's a reason that I said that first, because that is the potentially most important thing. Because if you don't get buy-in, even if you know why something should be, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
I was at a roundtable at GDC talking about automation, and I liked the way the presenter kicked things off, which he said, "Hey, by show of hands, who here has continuous integration at their studio?" And I saw a bunch of hands go up. And then he started going down this list. So if you're trying to start, here's the list that the 5 things they gave of least complicated to most complicated. Continuous integration, automated errors or warnings, automated smoke tests, automated functional tests, automated unit tests. So if you went out and saw the Sea of Thieves chat about their awesome unit tests, don't go there if you don't have the other 4 yet. So I think for somebody who's first starting out, find the simplest thing on that list first. And again, go back and make sure that it's valuable to your team. But I think those are fairly universal things that you should be able to make an easy argument. So find the simple things that you can automate first. Also, take stock of what you've got. Because I know I fell in this pit trap when we were prepping for this episode. I'm like, I don't have any automation. Then I looked around and I'm like, oh, that counts, that counts, that counts. So take a look at what you already have working. Who's working on that thing? Because sometimes it is a QA resource. Often it's not, depending on how your structure and ecosystem is set up at your company. It could be programmers, could be engineers, could be SDETs. What do you already have? And then who would be the person to set these things up? Because, like personally, I have a bunch of testers and analysts that not all of them have programming backgrounds, but some do. But my programmers have set up a lot of that stuff. So my first step was finding, okay, who are the programmers at my company who've already done something? What have they done? How does it get used? And hopefully don't find the same boat that I often find myself in that, oh yeah, we made that years ago. Nobody uses it. Oh, hey, show me how it works. So take inventory of what's already been built and try to build upon that.
I once worked on a project actually that already had headless clients, and they only did like one very specific thing, which was that they would log into the game and then they would travel between areas, and that was it. And I really like I had this dream of taking those headless clients and doing more with them, but it never happened. And I think a big part of why is I didn't articulate why exactly it would be useful and what concrete thing we would be saving time on. Instead, I just said, wouldn't it be nice or wouldn't it be neat if we had this thing that could do this thing? And wouldn't it be nice and wouldn't it be neat are just too darn vague for most people to like suddenly like turn around and invest a bunch of time into a project like that. Because yeah, it might be nice, it might be neat, but how much time is it saving? How much money is it saving? Like, what bugs are we finding that we wouldn't find otherwise? Those were not questions I was answering. And so it never went anywhere. But I think if I had done a little bit more like due diligence on cataloging the things that I would not have to spend manual testing time on because we have these headless clients, or the number of bugs we would potentially find, or something, if I had some data point to say here's why it's important and why we need to do it beyond just it would be neat, then I think that the value proposition would have been a lot easier for the people I was pitching it to like agree to. But because I didn't know the answer and it was kind of a mystery, it was maybe going to be a mystery until we actually tried it. It was a lot harder to sell them on. But I think there was information available to me that I could have shared, like how much time was being spent on actually looking for the bugs that I thought this was going to help us find. And then I could have compared that to amount of time an engineer says that they think it'll take them to set it up. And then I could say, okay, well, it's going to take them 10 hours to make it, and it's going to save us 100 hours of testing. So that's the math. What do you think? Do you want to do it? But if you don't come prepared with that kind of data point, then it would be neat or it would be nice. I don't think that's going to be enough to sell anyone on doing it.
And in an industry like game dev, which is known for making everything on time and not having crunch at all, having that information of why we should now add to the basket of totally reasonable backlog that has all those buffers, yet another thing.
Yeah.
The producer is super happy when you come in and you're like, hey, I know we are basically, a year after we promised to deliver that game. What if we also add automation to the basket? You won't get far. So making that compelling argument, and we've had this client, your compelling data point will be something like, aside from finding stuff, one creative thing we used headless clients for is, instead of whenever you want to check something in multi with a person and grabbing that person, whatever they're doing, stopping them, whatever they're doing, and grabbing them for multiplayer session because you have to check something quickly, have headless clients constantly searching for a game. And whenever you need to go into a game and check something, there's always a headless client waiting for you. And now not only you save yourself the time, you save the other's time, and that that delay, that 15-30 minutes after you got interrupted, you're not productive as you were 50 minutes ago. So
yeah,
finding those creative ways to basically sell the idea, look, like it's gonna save everyone's time, especially the person, like if you're saying to that producer how the producer and his team can benefit from that, is super crucial. Because otherwise, again, like most of the projects are running on a very short deadline. Going and saying, hey, can I add more stuff to our plate, is going to be usually a no-no.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that real quick, like another thing to think about is whose time are you saving? Because like if I want to spend engineering time to save tester time, but the engineering time is stretched thin because they have a bunch of stuff that they need to do, then that value proposition changes even more so, because they're going to be like, well, like, you testers, you have all this extra time that we're not crunching on, and these engineers, like, we need them to make features, and that's the thing that is really slowing the team down, is we only have so many engineers. So you're asking us to stop them from doing a thing that we really need them to do to save you time on a thing that, you know, we can probably spare some of your time to do that manually. It's going to be harder to convince them. So you have to think about whose time are you saving, not just how much time. And because of that, if you have a value proposition that is more tied to saving the engineers time, well, if we build this automation that will take them 10 hours, it will save them 100 hours of bug fixing because they're not going to have to go back and debug it later. Then it is a much more appealing proposition than saving, or potentially than saving 100 hours of manual tester time, because maybe we have manual tester time to spare and we don't have engineering time to spare. So that's another thing to think about, is whose time are you saving? Because depending on how your team is built, that might actually matter quite a bit. Maybe you are stretched thin for manual tester time and you have a ton of engineering time, in which case, yeah, you should invest in building more automation to save those manual testers' efforts, right? Maybe you should even have some of the engineer systems manual testing. I don't know.
Look, Mr. Producer, why should I have my time stretched thin if I can make engineers' time stretched thin, huh?
So it's super important to think about that. Whose time are you saving when you're talking about saving time? Because for your team, it might not be the same. There might be some people who are more stretched thin than others.
Yeah, I'm glad you.
I had a mentor that described it as think about what it is that keeps the person you're trying to convince up at night.
Yeah.
So like, and that I think has been a really powerful framework for me to consider. Like, what stresses are they under? What pressures are they under? What are their limited resources? And how is it that the things that I want to shape or share and have potentially implemented change that? And I've even used that sometimes to like check myself beforehand and realize the thing I'm talking about doesn't make sense to do because I'm seeing it through that lens now, and now I understand that that's not the right call. But it does make it so that as soon as you go to that, you're talking about the money or the time or the specific things that they are under pressure for, that they need to make sure it happens. And you're much more likely to get it if you can check those boxes and know exactly what to say.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on bug prevention. I had a recent example where we had issues where these particular errors were coming up and causing problems. The programmers were investigating the errors, finding out that it was for a designer to fix. The designer implemented something the wrong way and probably didn't even notice it. So my pitch to production and programming was, I can save programming time by having programmers help me with this automation to tell my designers that they're doing it wrong immediately so that they can fix it without involving a programmer. So I need you to invest some time, invest some programming time to save some programming time all around bug prevention. And it was a bit of a weird sell. I had to go talk to people individually and they're like, here's how it maps out. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. But yeah, bug prevention is definitely a source of time loss that you can use automation to try to either prevent or just simplify. The other big savings I had there for the designers was if I tell you, hey, you did that thing wrong 6 months ago, can you fix it? Versus, hey, you did that thing wrong 6 minutes ago, can you go fix it?
Yeah.
I'm asking the same thing, but one of them is much easier to do.
Yeah.
There's metrics, I don't remember exactly where, about like how much cheaper it is to catch bugs faster. And especially if you think about like developer flow state, if they were just working on a piece of code that, or like a part of the game that like they were just working on it and you catch something while it's still fresh in their head, fixing that and solving problems in that area is so much easier and faster than it would be if it was that 6 months later. 6 months later. And that's huge. Hey, also real quick, you just talked about like sharing your concept with individuals as well. Keep in mind that like a lot of decisions are not are group decisions. And if you are going into, let's say, a meeting to share your proposal and have it get approved, if you can run it by a couple people that will be in that meeting that are decision makers and potentially get them on your side by having that close one-on-one conversation, and also practicing how you're saying it and what you are saying, and making sure even like, hey, I know this is the person that I need to actually like convince. Do you know what keeps them up at night? Going back to what I said before, like use your resources, use your connections, get different perspectives to make sure that you understand and have buy-in even going into the meeting where that decision may be made, and you will be in such a better shape to actually make it happen or not happen if you find that wasn't the right thing. But like use those resources to really make sure and vet your idea and validate that you are doing this the right way and you haven't overlooked anything, so you've got all the answers that you need to get that yes.
One more to tack onto that. Once you've got it set up, reiterate to folks that this is a win. Because like we implemented one recently that would immediately tell us that the build failed, and my production director was like, "Oh no, I saw that." I'm like, "No, Ryan, this is great. We know about it immediately." He's like, "Yeah, right." And like this guy's got years and years of experience, but I had to remind him like, "This is a good thing." He's like, "Oh yeah, you're right. This is a good thing. We're solving it faster than we would have otherwise. Like the root cause was going to be there either way, but we're solving it faster." So just a reminder, like once you've got that up and running, make sure you reinforce this is why it's a win. This is why it's good. Yeah. Make sure people are seeing it for what it is, because when they see red text error messages, they're going to have that guttural reaction, and they might need a little soothing afterwards and be like, this is good. This is a good thing.
I see that red flashing button on my left screen, and I just avoid it, not knowing what it means. But I wanted to bring up the points from the community. Ariel did a lovely meeting with our community a week ago. So highly recommend whenever we're doing a podcast beforehand, we're doing a community event when we invite members of the community to speak about the topic. And one of the points they brought up was, is there a point in a project where it's too late to automate? And the answer from the community was kind of because if you go when we were discussing about thin backlogs and being before release, probably adding stuff just before the release, it's not the smartest move. So the sooner you start, the better. When you're a live product versus a product in development, definitely a perspective, like Dani said, like perspective shifts. Like you cannot just something that makes sense a year ago doesn't necessarily means it makes sense now to do it. But I also think that it doesn't mean that you cannot dream about automation. It's just depending on in which state of development cycle you are, you have to shift your perspective of that cycle. Like if you're pre-alpha and you have all the time in the world and you can dream big, then go for it. But if you're 2 weeks before release, probably it's not the best way to start a huge automation framework to automate things, right? So you rather think about small, easy wins to make the release smoother, rather than trying to push for something that, as we said before, like you won't convince anyone, because that's not what is keeping people at night right now. There's release coming. If that automation does not solve that problem, then don't go near me for the next month, right?
I had one quick comment on that. When you're early on, telemetry is not a very useful tool when you just have a small team that are testing. But as you get closer to release, you inevitably scale up your external QA. You have more devs actually getting in the build and testing their own work. Like telemetry actually becomes more valuable as that automation framework kind of dies off. So if anybody finds themselves in that boat, I'd encourage them to look into telemetry. And by that, I mean, when you're playing, automatically catching logs, doing heat maps of stuff, so that, yes, you can't build the framework, but you have so many manual bots running around your game now that if you can collect data from them, you can get a win that those early projects can't get. So if you find yourself late, or you're a live service product and you get telemetry off your players, you may not catch it going out the door of that weird edge casey crash, but if you can catch the telemetry from your 100 users who had it, you can fix it in the patch quickly.
And that's an easy example of automating a process. Remember those dark age times whenever there were crashes and user was like, my game is crashing. Now you have to have a customer support person reaching out to that person. Hey, can you give me the logs? And the person is like, how do you use folders? I don't know. Now you want me to go to what percent up data percent? What is this magic? And it like does the process. Why, if you can just not even have the telemetry, because aside from having your team implement telemetry in your product, there are ready-made solutions that you can integrate with your software and have those logs remotely delivered to you. So whenever a user is reporting crash on Twitter, most of the time it's the same nickname as in-game, so you don't even have to ask the user what's your in-game nickname. You just search the nickname in the database, and it's like, oh, it's that person. Oh, this is why it crashes, and you can fix it like that instead of having a 2-week process. And probably all the customer support people will have those experiences where they were just ghosted by users because the user at some point just was fed up and was like, I'm not going to bother giving you logs anymore even. So it's like you kind of save so much time with the simplest of things.
I do like that, the idea of a tagline for telemetry being like turn your playtesters into manual bots or something like that. But it's a great idea. Like you might already have the information you would generate from test automation available to you if you just take the time to capture it. And so sometimes it is less about I need to make a bot that will do this thing for me, and more about I need to capture this data that is already being generated. Um, you know, maybe even things like if you say had a bunch of playtesters who were doing like end-to-end playtests, and you were just looking at the telemetry of what quests are being completed, you might find that yeah, the golden path quests, all of those are getting completed, but some of these side quests have literally never been done before. Why is that happening? Like, why isn't anyone completing any of these side quests? And then it turns out, oh, because they're not showing up in game, or people are blocked and for whatever reason didn't report it because they thought it was an incomplete feature or something like that. And then you can use that telemetry to lead you to bugs by just interpreting the data correctly.
I think Amazon was using that thing where you could, when you were reporting a bug through the game, it would capture where you were standing. So then they will heat map the areas people are reporting bugs from to see where are the areas that there are more bugs in the game than the other areas. Yeah, that's sexy.
So
other things you can do is just get your programmers to fire something on screen when a bad thing happens. There's a million ways to do this, but if you have a bunch of that manual testing going on, if you can say, this should never happen, you have an assert, you have something that's going to crash later, if you can just put some red text on your screen or anything blinking to say, please file bug. We've had a lot of success with that in the past of just, yeah, I don't have it automated, but if anybody ever hits this, please report a bug is a very useful phrase that can get you, again, off of those 10 or 20 testers. If they hit that one edge case, you finally catch it.
So when we put together the run of show for this episode, we had tried to come up with like what are the basic steps to getting automation built on a team, and we've kind of already talked about a few of them. But I just want to run through those steps real quick and then talk about the ones we haven't really hit on yet. So the first step that we came up with was define where you are in the development cycle, like understand what your team's start to understand what your team's needs are based on when you are in products production. The second step was identify a need or a use case for automation. So that what we've been talking about extensively, like those individual examples of here's a need, here's a use case, here's a space where we can potentially automate something. Start to identify all of those needs. The third step was identify technology available to you. And we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to dig into this more before we jump on to the next few steps here. So like, how do you identify what technology is available to you as like solutions for automation?
So if you're working in a game engine, usually if it's a good game engine, by good, I mean on those external one, because internal is a different beast, right? But external like Epic and Unity, they both have automation frameworks built inside them. So digging into documentation and finding out how to use that to your advantage is probably the easiest one. It gets a little bit trickier when you have your own engine, so the company owns the game engine and it's not like a product that you sell to other companies. Then you have to just be creative with Googling and trying to figure out either ready-made products like we mentioned, Ranorex, that's a interface automation framework. Of course, it depends obviously on the type of game you're making. So it will be different for PC and console games, especially console games. Those are notorious to be very difficult to automate.
We should have
but
gotten
when
sponsored
you're
by
on mobile,
Vanarix with how many times we've mentioned them.
I mean, you don't want me to get spicy about Radar,
Okay,
so maybe let's not.
maybe we save that for the end to balance it out.
Yeah, but when you're on mobile, for example, there's lots of awesome tools to automate software and games on mobile, right? So when you don't have an engine that is a product, then either find a solution that is you can just buy and use it, or as we said many times before, like talk to your programmers and be like, I want to automate those things. Do you think it's possible in our team?
Yeah.
And work with whatever. Like if you don't have any programming background, then probably programmers are your biggest allies in this, and talking to them, figuring out what tech stack you're using currently, what is possible to do if you don't want to spend money on products, right? So it's always either you want to spend time of your team, or you just want to go shopping on the internet.
Yeah, I think that if you are working with like your company's own engine, there's probably a dedicated team that like makes that engine and adds to it and creates tools for it and all that stuff. Those are probably the people you want to talk to about automation, because if you're going to build any kind of like in-engine tool that the team at Broad can use, then they're probably the people that would do it. But your own specific like project might have their own automation that your engineers have built. But the answer is usually talk to the engineers or the estates if you have them, and ask them what's available. And go beyond just your project. If you have an in-house engine, talk to that engine team too.
Yeah, when you are talking to them, I want to remind folks: don't tell them, "Oh, I want this thing." Take a step back and explain, here's the problem I'm facing, here's the thing I'm doing to solve it right now, and why it sucks. Because I've got like a 500 batting average. About half the time I'm like, yeah, that was the right suggestion. Half the time I'm dead wrong. And I'm like, man, this thing sucks. I think we should do this. They're like, that's hard and takes days, weeks, months of work. But I could give you this that does it better in like by the afternoon. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, yes, please, that thing. So make sure you're defining the problem. Let them help co-author the solution to the problem. Also, you'll get that every once in a while. They're like, oh yeah, we already did that a while ago. You should go use it. Oh, yep. I should have read that blog post, huh?
Yeah, that's another thing is be aware of the automation that already exists on your project. I actually had an experience once where I had a tester who was doing this daily morning smoke test on the new build that we had every day, just to make sure that the build was usable for the team to do testing and play testing. So he would come in before everyone, and then he would run through this smoke test. And I looked at the test cases of his smoke test when I first was brought onto the team, and I asked him, did you know that we already have an automated smoke test that is run on every single build that we make that does these exact test cases and more? And he said no. And I'm like, okay, well, do you think you still need to run this test given that you now know that? And he said, absolutely not. Of course you don't, right? Like, we already are testing that, but he didn't know that automation existed. And so he was doubling up on work that he didn't even know he was doubling up on because he just wasn't aware. So I think a huge, like, big step to understanding what automation your team needs and what testing your team needs too. Not even just automated testing, but what testing in general your team needs is to know what automated testing do you already have? What unit tests do you already have? What like build tests do you already have? Like, because that might inform where you're going to then spend your time and what you might ask for, both in the automated sense and in the manual sense. Okay.
I always suggest
Go ahead, Mark.
going into the gateway drug to any automation is Python. Just for the giggles, looking at the libraries because basically Python will have library for anything. Like the community will create library whenever they did something personally, they will just upload it to Peep, and have it download. So there is stuff for Unity in Python, so you can basically find any integration between Python and Unity. The same goes for Epic. And I even found things for Red Engine from CD Projekt, just trying to find if you can find something that somebody wrote to connect something. So
can you give an
you'd be
example of
surprised.
like something useful you found by just searching for like a library that already has it?
So, for example, you wanna automate something using Python in Epic Engine. You can go to pip, which is the repository of all the libraries for Python. I just typed Epic, and you can see all the things that, for example, accessing assets in Epic, or for Godot, for example. I don't know if Godot has an automation framework for it, but there are definitely libraries in Python for Godot. So I already saw there were scripts for accessing assets, scenes. So whenever you want to write anything automation-wise and you don't know how to integrate Python with Godot, somebody already did it for you. So I usually recommend Python as a gateway drug, because any software that was created probably has a Python library associated with it. So even if it doesn't automate anything, at least we'll create an API, which is a set of instructions how Python will communicate with that software. So whenever you're starting out, you don't have programmers say are busy, you don't have resources, and you always dream about doing any programming, go for Python, because it's as easy as, aside from learning how to program in Python, you just download a library, you look on the instruction guide, and it basically tells you how to communicate with Godot. And now you can easily create automation in an engine that I don't know if has an automation framework, but now you can create it yourself very easily.
Cool.
I just want to quickly go back to what David said before about like when asking a question, like not being like, I want this thing. It's like, here is the landscape of this problem that I'm trying to solve. And make sure that like you consider, is the problem I'm trying to solve also trying to solve another problem? Because sometimes that's multi-layered, and telling just like I've done that before where I've like, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, and people are like, why? Oh, well, because I'm trying to solve this problem, and then that one has the easier solution. Just make sure you've gone all the way down as low as you can. And I also, on top of that, want to emphasize, like, ask for help, either in your company or in external groups that you know about. Find people, find resources. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Most people love getting asked to help them. Like, most people enjoy it when somebody asks them for help and will happily provide time if they can. Like, don't not ask because you're worried about like how it will look or whatever. Just ask for help. So many people are going to jump on that and give you that guidance in that direction that you might need. Tell you about that Python library that you didn't know existed. Like, so there's so much there. Just ask for help.
Trying to think of a practical example of that, but like it feels like asking a programmer to like build you a knife sharpener, and they're like, well, why do you want a knife sharpener? And it's like, oh, because I need a sharp knife. And they're like, oh, well, it might actually be easier for me to just make this tool that is like a knife and is sharp from the get-go and never needs to be sharpened, and then you don't even need this knife sharpener you were asking for.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but anyway, it's there.
Well, then you find out they're using the knife to cut ice cubes because I need to break it into smaller pieces so it'll be easier to melt. They're like, why not just make you a pot that boils water? Oh, that would be great.
Yeah,
you can do that?
That's way faster, right?
Pre-melted ice.
Yeah, but usually when with that advice of going to your programmers and asking about stuff, and they're like, we already do it. Like when you go to engine programmers or programmers in general, and you're like, I need this tool to find issues with certain assets, then they probably already have a tool that helps find them, and you will be surprised how many things they automate themselves, and then they can just change it in a tool. Like I've seen it multiple times when something that was used just by the programming team using commands in the programming language. It was just easy of adding a simple UI and packaging as a simple tool that you click, and now anybody in company can use the same thing for finding errors in assets. And if nobody asked about that, only programmers would have a nice tool to automate finding errors and not the whole team, right?
All right, so I'm going to move us along. So we talked about step 3, which was identify the technology that's available to you. We also talked a bit about step 4, which is identify the resources you have to create and maintain automation. I wanted to move on to step 5, which is identify KPIs. How do you know if a failed attempt to automate was a good decision to make? As in, if you said, I want to automate something and you tried to and it didn't work out, like how do you know that was worth the attempt to try, even if it didn't work out in the end? Like what KPIs can you use to identify good, bad automation?
Dani, I think it was even your question.
Yeah, I mean, like, it kind of goes back to the, like, why did you start automate? Like, what did you identify in the first place? Like, take the example of I should be able to catch bugs faster. If beforehand you gathered the data to make that argument, and you had identified this is our current rate of actually capturing bugs, you should be able to set a time bound goal to identify, like, within 6 months we will see a decrease in the average time it takes to report a bug that is there, so that you can kind of identify and set a goal. Did we actually meet the expectation that made it worth doing this in the first place? And so whatever you identified as the reason to do it, make sure that you continue to track that. Make sure you track that before to get the metrics to be able to prove the argument, but also make sure you're tracking that after to actually validate that itself and avoid sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
You might spend a bunch of time doing automation, and you might have spent a bunch of time gathering this data and getting it right. Have that time-bound goal. Have that time-bound piece of, like, check in with yourself and be like, did this automation effort hit the metrics that I'm expecting it to? Are we catching bugs faster? Are we able to spend more time? Are we able to spend more time actually doing the manual validation? Is that getting us? Is our, like, catch rate increasing because we are spending more of time, like, doing the exploratory testing? And validate that hypothesis, and don't be afraid to put it down if it didn't actually do it. If your automation setup is taking a bunch of time and a bunch of, like, maintenance effort, because, like, maybe you are doing an image-based find on something, and that image keeps getting changed over and over again, and you didn't realize that was part of the process. Now suddenly all that, like, you're spending so much time maintaining that and putting in a new screenshot every single time that you lose that value. Like, balance that, make sure that you're truly doing that. And also, to that point, like, maybe you do get that, but also recognize what other impacts there might be. If you are, like, maybe you are now catching bugs faster, but you're also, like, maybe the actual process of release has gotten slower in the sense of, like, maybe there's certain manual validation that you have to do. If you are catching things faster, but then not able to test the new stuff as much because you're maintaining tests, or because you're having to parse results, or whatever it be, make sure you understand, like, your team's goals, the goals of this new project, and make sure that both of them hit the success metrics that you're looking for before you be like, let's keep going on this because it's working.
So I think, to summarize what you're saying, you should already know what success and failure look like before you set out and build the thing, and then afterwards it'll be easier to look at it and measure that. You shouldn't be looking back and coming up with what success looks like after the fact.
Yeah.
Which
exactly.
usually,
That
unfortunately,
goes into
happens.
how you communicated at the beginning.
Yeah. Because it goes back to that sunken cost fallacy. Sometimes people, because they're so invested right now, because they didn't have those goals and clear objectives, they will now find ways to justify that spend, and they will just continue pouring money because it's, you're so invested that now it's just stupid to say no, no to that. You'll be like, what do you mean? Like, imagine having 10,000 testers, and we do that, and how much value it would bring if you had 10,000 testers testing that thing. And you're like, but we don't have even a use case for having 10,000 testers testing it, so why are you bringing it up? And you'll have those people just overinflating values just to justify spending so much time on automation.
Mm-hmm. Or like the people, the teams that are like, we need to automate. Why? Because it's automation. You just
So
have
automation
to.
good. That's why.
Like,
Automation good.
automation good.
We automate. Therefore, we good.
Mm-hmm. I know that other company automates, so we obviously also have to automate. Like we have to. Like, don't do that. Have a goal, understand why, know what your outcome, know what that outcome, what that like success metric is going into it. Make sure you have the data to compare it to before you go into it, and then drive towards that.
Yeah.
And prove your theory and put it down if you did not prove it right, or adjust. Like, goals are great to fail as long as you learn something from it. And sometimes it's maybe not that you did the wrong thing, but maybe you just did it the wrong way. And you can now make some tweaks and adjust. And it's not just like, I implemented a process and that's now the process and we're not going to reflect on it again.
Yeah. I want to bring, when talking about KPIs, people always focus so much on hard data and numbers. But it's also important, as we said many times on this podcast, automation is here to help people and help the teams. So asking for soft data and asking teams on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about the process right now? And then when you ask about how they feel about the process, it's like 3 out of 10 because it's tedious, problematic, all that stuff. And over the time, every 2 weeks or a month, while starting implementing that automation, ask that question again and again. And because if you don't do that, sometimes the numbers improve. Sorry, I have a screwdriver, but by the way, you just noticed it, randomly picked up. They will be like, the numbers are improving, like we have mean time to fix, bugs are being reported, but it still team feels like it's not helping, then you need still to investigate, because at the end, even if the hard data said that it improved everything, but they feel that people don't feel like that automation helped them, it's a straight way to just abandoning that automation solution. So don't only focus on hard data, focus also on the soft data. Ask people how they feel. Does it help them? If they've seen an improvement, because if your hard data says it did, but the team doesn't notice it, then you have problem that you have to deal with.
It's funny that everything the two of you just said is the exact same things I run for playtesting. It's like, come in with a hypothesis, tell me how well this should work, because otherwise you'll get confirmation bias. So yeah, come in with a strong hypothesis. We think by doing X, the player will now pick up the gun. The automation will now, remove this hour smoke test we were doing every day. And then you have to re-ask those questions. You can ask those scaling questions on 1 to 5. How do you feel? I know I'm not going to dive too much into it, but it's all the playtest stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Playtest your automation.
And test your automation, was that? Did you want to expand on that?
No, I'm just saying that like everything all the good practices you should do for playtesting, you should use for your automation. So, strong hypothesis: did we confirm or deny it? Giving scores before and after you implemented the thing. Scheduling a time to review it. Like if you're going to set up this automation, it's like, hey, in 3 months this thing should be great. Good. Go to Outlook. 3 months from today, these 3 people will get in a room and chat about these 2 topics. Because you'll forget. And then it will come up, and then you can ask yourselves those questions. Go, oh, yeah, maybe we should turn that thing off. It's not really doing what we wanted it to do.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, the last of the 6 steps that we had here, I'm going to let Marcin explain this one because he wrote it. And that is step 6, just do it or don't.
Yeah, because we already touched about it, right? Sometimes you don't do the things because it's popular. Don't just adopt ChatGPT and sell all your personal documents to it to write a nice report, because it might occur that it shows in all other users. If you ask about Sony internal documents, it will just start spinning out random users on the internet. which happened because somebody at Sony decided that it's a great idea to make use ChatGPT as a summary for notes and documents, and it entered the test data. So now it was spewing classified NDA documents to random users on the internet. So with all the steps that we mentioned before, now it's just a decision to either it's worth automating or it isn't, and it's also fine. So people are not pressured to always automate. Just because that company had success with automation doesn't mean that your company needs automation. Don't do it as a token that, it's 21st century and you should automate everything. Like, please don't. Just use it as something that brings value to you and your team. And if you decide on automation, have those KPIs and be sure that it will bring you value, because otherwise you're gonna do the worst thing ever, which I had experienced multiple times when the company was like, well, we are now a hip, very popular company, we should do automation, and they just randomly try to automate things. It obviously doesn't work, and now the whole team is biased negatively against automation. And for the next 5 or 10 years, they didn't touch automation because they have that one experience that we tried automation and it didn't work out. And now you created a situation when you could have automation, it could have been successful for you, but because half of the team had been burned, now you don't have that. So yeah, make a decision, do it. If you feel confident, just do it. But if it's not worth it, just leave it for better times. You don't have to automate. It's fine.
All right. Before we start wrapping up, David actually had come up with a list of like little easy automation things that you can introduce to your team. We just loved this list so much because he just fired them off in our prep meeting that we were like, David, we're just going to have you do that on the episode. So, David, please give us your list of here's some easy things you can potentially automate on your team at your list.
Awesome. Going for it. Again, a lot of my experience has been in Unreal and Jira. That's one thing we didn't touch on too much, is that a lot of our focus is usually how do I get the engine to do the thing. There's other tools you use every day, like Jira's and bug databases, TCMs. So here's what we got. Changeless integration, very basic Unreal Game Sync, and most engines have this, is that my non-programmers don't have to compile the code because an automated process compiles that every day. Auto players. Again, the simplest version of an auto player is, can you get it to automatically load the map and close? That's a smoke test. You don't need to go further than that. Once you have that, you can say, can I load multiple maps? Can I get it to load map and ghost from one edge to the other and stop? One way we found here is that once the programmer sets that up, you can hand that to an analyst, a non-technical person, to be like, hey, or not non-technical, but non-programmer person, to go set up all the points that you're going to ghost around and fly to. Telemetry, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but two types of telemetry. Obviously, there's some like geographical telemetry. You could do heat maps and see where things happen, see where did the player die. If everyone's dying in the same spot, maybe we go look at that. Is it not a boss fight? But I think what's even simpler is logs. Unity, Unreal, all the engines have their log files. They usually have different error levels in the log files. One thing you can do is just gather that all up into a database and say, which error of the most fatal variety is coming up the most? And then let's go see who triggered that. Can QA go reproduce that? Can we go fix that one? Okay, great. That one's dead. Let's go look at the next highest, most egregious one and work our way down. Another way you can do that, and I believe Unreal and Unity both do this, you can have the log running on the side. There's an Unreal command to pop the log up on the side, filter it to just the most critical errors, which means it will be blank the whole time, unless you hit a critical error. So you have a black screen that's just there, and as you're playing, if you see a red line of text come up, that is an egregious bug you can go find. You have just reproduced it. You can go log it now. Again, you wouldn't have known that otherwise, but you can automate that step of seeing it on the side. Unreal Map Check. Unreal has an entire suite of map checks that you're supposed to run. Anytime you check in something, you should run this, and it'll tell you everything wrong that you should go fix. People don't look at that, of course. So one thing we did is we wrote a job that just says, load map, run map check, output responses. And then I sent my QA saying, hey, for all these that are error level, let's ignore the warnings. Let's get through all the errors, find them, log them, get them killed. And we run that cycle once a week. Once that was clean, run it a couple times a week. Eventually, we looked to make that totally preemptive, that it would tell the user immediately when they check something in within like 10 minutes. Exec commands on launch parameter. Again, all the engines have this. You can make a text file that has multiple console commands, and then call that text file as a console command. So if you find yourself always entering the same 3 console commands, you don't need a programmer. You can go open a text file, save it in the right spot, find where Unity or Unreal references that text file, and now instead of typing 3 commands, you type 1 command. Take that a step further, they both have this as well. You can set up hotkeys via INI files. INI files are just little text files that come with your game. You can go in there, find the right thing to overwrite, and say, cool, I want Control 8 to always use Ghost. And now instead of typing, you just Control 8, Control 7, go back and forth. That is the one that I always put off for the longest time. Then as soon as I did it, I'm like, oh, its return on investment, its ROI was roughly a week. I was like, I should have done this years ago. It was silly. But yeah, lots of engines have that. Jira automation. Here's a few fun automations we set up. One, auto assign or triage. Like QA or production always gets stuck trying to figure out where all the bugs go to. I'm like, hey, every time the editor crashes, it goes to this person. So if my bug always reports editor crash, I started automating those things. In fact, I gave my users the option to set like strike team and department. So I'm like, oh, I know it's the content team and its art, or I know it's the gameplay team and its design. That allowed me to automate where it should go to. So you set 2 simple values, and then I make a little matrix that says where it should go, all on the Jira backend through some brutal, groovy scripting. It's a lot easier in Jira Cloud. I'm using old tools. One-button transitions. Jira just does this. You usually have a transition to say it's resolved. I made a transition that says QA retest. And all that transition does is it moved it to needs verification. It set the correct resolution as cannot reproduce. And it added a comment saying, QA, please retest this. Why? Because I kept doing those 3 steps over and over and over. I wanted them to know why I was just closing all these bugs, and I didn't want to leave it without a comment. So I just made a transition in Jira that does all 3 things. And so now it's just one click. I fire that off. And then eventually other people saw me using that, and they're like, can we get that? I was like, yeah. So now I think my whole team has it at this point. Auto unblock. I know it's you, but we often find ourselves putting a Jira as blocked. I can't do this until that other thing is done. We wrote a script that says, whenever the other thing is done, move this back to open with a comment. Very, very simple. In fact, we expanded that to have a QA blocked, that if a bug should be CNR when that other thing is done, it would go back to QA for retest versus going back to the other person as open. It's, again, very simple script just to automatically do that thing. Because until then, I was manually checking for things that needed to be manually unblocked, like every week. Another fun one we set up, last tested. So I added a custom field in Jira that just says, when was this issue last tested? Just a date time field. And then I automated that when you open a bug, it sets the date time to the time created. If you ever fail a bug, it updates the time field to that as well. And then people can manually edit it as a third method. What that enabled is now I can look at my bug database and see which bugs have gone a long time, and I can make a matrix of, well, if it's this severity and it's gone more than this amount of time, I want them to go retest that snippet of the bug database. Or when my producers or directors come to me and say, hey, is this fresh? I can say, look, that was tested last week. We know that's still happening. You haven't changed anything. Like, oh, okay. I have now saved QA another pass of retesting that bug the 13th time because I'm logging when they retested it. And I think we call that auto tagging. I think this Marcin might have added this, but very simply, if somebody has something in the description that's a key word that's important to you, like, I don't know, combat, death, I'm trying to think if I'm using Mario coin, just put it into the title, into the summary of the Jira. Very easy to just say, if you find these things, put a prefix on your Jira, or fill in a custom field that tracks that. Filters and structures. I'll get to subscriptions. Other Jira thing, Jira has export-import functionality. You could just go to a filter, export it to CSV, and then inside filters, you can say import. Where do I use this? If I have something I'm going to have to report a lot of times, I export it, copy those rows in Excel, edit things, and then upload. And if you have some Excel view, you can do some substitutes, concatenates, other word finds, or just control replace. Be able to put in a lot of bugs at once or a lot of tasks at once. In the Jira one, I don't think I had it here. Jira has something called subscriptions. Basically, you have a filter. It is set up, and it will send you an email of everything in that filter once a day. It's like, cool. What do I use that for? It has a feature that if the filter is empty, do not send. So what I often do is I say, cool, I have a filter for bugs that should never happen, like a crash bug that is low severity. Like if anybody enters a crash that's at low severity and it was created within the last 15 minutes, it goes to this filter. And then that filter goes off every 15 minutes. If there's anything in there, email David with that bug, which means that it does absolutely nothing 99% of the time, but it catches whenever a bug goes into this JQL filter that should not exist. So I find bugs that are set up wrong, mistriaged, assigned to people who aren't on the team anymore. I have a whole bunch of these that I just set them up and I go, and by the way, you need absolutely no admin permissions in your Jira project to go do that today. You can just go do that. That's a baked-in feature. All right, a couple other ones. Python scripts. I know Marcin covered this a bunch, but we made Python scripts that could do cool stuff, and then we're like, wait, why don't we just run these whenever the build runs? So now we know where a lot of things happen in our game because we just put those as part of the build process effectively. Other cool one, one of my old coworkers set this up, is bookmarklets. This is technology from 20 years ago. Is that it's a bookmark. It's a bookmark in your browser that takes information out of your current URL and makes a new URL. Where does that help us? Everything for Jira happens through URLs. So what we've developed is that it can go find in page the value for this custom field, and then go search for all other Jiras with that value in the custom field. We actually tracked some like locational data. So we actually set it up to find all issues that happen within 10 meters of the current issue. It is excellent for deduping. And then what's my last one I have here? Auto dedupe call stacks. One of the things we did is we are tracking all of our call stacks through, whenever you crash your game, you're going to get a stack of code. One of the problems is once you get that call stack, did somebody else cause that crash? I don't want to be that dirty duper. We used to have an R2D2 that we'd put on your desk if you duped a bug. We don't do that anymore. It's easy. But anyway, if you're the one who caused that crash, we don't want that to be an issue. The automation step we did there is we wrote into our Jira that if anybody else produces the same call stack, we just add it as a comment to the existing bug. And ever since we added that automation, I have encouraged all of my QA to dupe crashes as much as they can, because then I know, did it happen in different levels? Or is it all the same level? Did you all have the same sword? Whatever the cause is. So we actually had a culture shift from avoiding dupes to encouraging dupes because we improved our automation around deduping. All right, that's what I got.
David, what's your programming background?
I am not a programmer.
Exactly.
I'm a math major. I know
so
just
awesome.
enough programming to know that I don't want to touch it. So I don't write code. These are all things that I did mostly using GUIs. A little bit of scripting. I'm like, okay, I can copy paste code and change a variable. Hey, yes, I'm not a programmer. None of that required me to do programming. A couple of them do involve me utilizing somebody else's code.
Awesome. So I appreciate the avalanche of examples, David. I hope that there were some people out there furiously scribbling that stuff down as you were talking. But they can always just go back and rewatch the clip if they needed to catch it again. So we're going to go ahead and move to wrap up. There was so much other stuff that we wanted to talk about here today, and we just don't have the time. So we're maybe going to look into doing another episode about automation in the future. We'll see. There's a lot to dig into here. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the day. And that means it's time to talk about today's bug of the cast. So, Dani, you had some tasks or some bugs that you wanted to tell us about. Tell us about your bugs.
So there was one in particular, and we kind of all went around and talked about different bugs before this. But one of the ones that I remembered in particular, so I used to play a game called Echo Arena. It was a VR zero gravity team sport. And one of the things about being in zero gravity is if you're moving, and you kind of keep moving until you end up hitting something or stopping somewhere. But there was some interesting grabbing mechanics And at one point, they released a bug where if you just reached behind you and like grabbed your back, you would just stop in dead wherever you were. And so like if you sometimes even if you like reached around to try and grab the disc, because it was a like almost like an ultimate frisbee type thing, if you like reach to grab it, you sometimes would even grab yourself and lose all of your momentum. And this was a very fast paced game and momentum really mattered. So like suddenly it's just, oh, and now I'm just kind of stuck in the middle of anywhere and I'm now going to float off in this direction, like very slow speeds. There's a lot of, there was a bunch of really interesting ones with that, but that one was one of the ones that I remember standing out as like, oh, that's not ideal, but also kind of funny.
Was there any way to like abuse it for like your own benefit? Like if you needed to suddenly stop or something like that?
Yes. So I'll use my hands as visuals. If you are flying this way and you've got it, if you've got the disc and someone else was coming at you to try and like intercept or like there was stunning, which where you drop the disc, once they launch off, that's their trajectory. They're going in that direction. So if they're going and you grabbed your back to suddenly stop, you would stop before like they crossed your path. So you could stop and then they'd keep going and then you can continue forward and they have to like kind of go until they hit something. So there was definitely ways of abusing it that were not ideal, but very funny.
I didn't even realize there were like zero
well.
G VR games. This game
There was.
it doesn't exist anymore. That's
the Echo Arena itself got shut down. There is still like that studio.
Just teasing.
Oh, definitely because of this bug specifically. No, I wish. That studio did make two really great single player games called Lone Echo and Lone Echo 2, which are zero gravity VR, very amazing, beautiful games. But yeah, that one sadly, the multiplayer online sport basically is sadly no more. But
bummer.
Rest in peace,
Rest
Echo.
in peace. All right. Well, thanks for sharing those. That was fun. And that's it for us today, everyone. I want to thank Dani, David, Marcin for joining me on the podcast today. We'd also like to thank our audience for listening. We wouldn't be doing this podcast without you. And if you have any suggestions for future topics or bugs of the day, we'd love to hear them. If you're a QA professional and would like to come on to the podcast, we'd love to have you. In either way, please contact us at undergroundgameqaconf@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on Twitter at undergroundqa. We also have LinkedIn, and you can find us there because we would love to hear from you and collaborate. Another great way is to just jump into our Discord and reach out to one of the admins directly. That's a great way to get a hold of us. Before we go for real, does anyone have anything that they would like to plug?
I will. So I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a quality engineer at a company called Mabl. Mabl is actually a low-code test automation tool. So depending on like, it is a like one unified platform, browser, API. Like there's a lot of different things that you can test. But I mentioned a couple of times about like getting metrics and making it so everyone can understand the tests. Like having something that is low-code is very powerful. And I work there because I love it and I see the benefit and the power of having a tool like this. So if you are looking for a framework to try and implement and something that has kind of like a low bar to entry and that is very accessible and very easy to understand, I would definitely check it out. Mabl. 14-day free trial. Plugged.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Join Discord. A lot of topics and a lot of great questions and a lot of great comments were thanks to the community input. There are lots of great talks. Please join us. Let's nerd out on automation and QA and game dev.
Okay, come to the Discord. If you want to chat about a bunch of the stuff I just talked about, any of that stuff that's in stock Jira, stock Unreal, stock Unity, I'd love to help people get that set up. Come to the Discord. Ask me questions.
Yeah, and I'll add that we've recently started this year, like doing more community events. So we have a monthly social hour on the second Saturday of every month at 10 a.m. Pacific. So we just jump into General Voice and basically hang out, maybe play some games. Last time we were playing scribble, but instead of using like normal Pictionary words, we were just pulling from the ISTQB and trying to draw like ISTQB words, and that was fun. Some of them were a lot easier than others. And then another thing we started doing recently is we're trying to do a community discussion the week before every podcast episode, so that we have an opportunity to talk to our community a little bit about things that they would like to see talked about in the episode. So if there was something in today's episode that you thought that we should have talked about more, maybe we didn't talk about enough, and you think, gosh, I really need to go in there and give them some criticism or some feedback on what they should talk about in their episodes, that's exactly what those discussions are for. So please join the Discord. We post all of our events in the Discord, including when we're recording and doing these live events. So it is definitely a great way to stay in touch with us. We also have a ton of useful channels in there. Like if you need to have your resume looked at, we have a channel where you can post your resume, and hiring managers and other people from the community will take a look at it and give you feedback on it. We have a jobs board where people can post jobs that they're seeing that might interest people in the industry, specifically QA-related jobs or QA-adjacent jobs. So there's lots of useful stuff there. Please join our Discord. I also want to plug another Discord. There's another Discord called Automated Testing in Games. And the reason why I'm plugging them, Automated Testing in Game Dev, sorry. And the reason I'm plugging them is because we actually reached out to that community when we were first recording this episode, and we asked them for if there was anyone who would be potentially interested in joining us here. And there's a lot of great resources in that Discord. So if you are looking for even more information on specifically automated testing, check out Automated Testing in Game Dev. It's a great Discord community. And I think that does it all for us today, folks. So I want to thank you all again for listening. So please keep playing, keep testing, and as always, please keep washing your hands. Goodbye.